Okay, so today we're going to talk about the base, and we're going to start out with these little fellows. I basically sculpted two skulls. I sculpted this guy, and then I altered him for the second skull. We'll talk about that in a second. The skull sculpts were actually pretty simple. We look at the side view. You can see I made one the as you can see, I made the top one part, I made the bottom one part. The teeth are all separate. Oh, little toofies. And then each horn is separate. Now, everything is sculpted except for the teeth. If you look here, you can see that I box modeled them. Now, why did I box model them? It just seemed to be the best way to do it. Don't forget how small these teeth are going to be. Not a lot of detail is going to be picked up, even in a resin printer. So I just needed the general shape down. The skull basically started as a sphere, and the bottom jawbone is what I did. Mesh, cube. Let's bring that in. Then we'll hit scale X to make it long. And then we will hit tab to go into edit mode. We'll cut it, and then we'll toss in a few more. How many we got there? That should be good enough. Okay, we look at it from above. Okay, what first we're going to do is we're going to subdivide it. Right? I usually pump those up to 3 to begin with. This is always set at 3. And then I add that so that the cage fits it. It just makes it easier for me to work with. That's just my personal preference, though. You don't have to do that. Now I'll take this. I'll hit R for rotate. Oops. Then G. And we're just looking to get an approximate shape. We're just looking for something to build on in sculpt mode here. So I just want to get the rough parameters of the jawbone down, and I'm not even going to try to get it as I'm not going to try to match that one. It doesn't need to be exact. I'm just trying to give you an idea of what I did. So now we'll select these, and I'll hit E for extrude, and then I'll just pull them up. Okay, and if you'll notice, we got this little part of the jawbone here. It sort of goes into a Y shape. The easiest way I found to do that is you go back here to loop cut. You make 2 loop cuts down the middle. Right, select them all, E to extrude, and then just pull it up. I might rotate that a little bit, and then you do the same to the other side. Select those 4 points, E to extrude, pull it up, rotate it a little, I'll pull it out a bit. Now I might have even, if you see that this kind of gets smaller here, so I don't remember whether I did that in the sculpt or I could have just done that, then hit scale and pulled it in a little bit. Maybe come on. Pulled that back out a little bit. And then I went into sculpt mode and went to town. Right, that probably needs to come. You know, those are too wide. That's a little too wide. That's not wide enough. Everything else from there was just, you know, added on into sculpt mode. And there's a vague anatomical accuracy here, but, you know, obviously this is not a medical sculpt. This is not physically accurate. First of all, it's supposed to be a demon. They don't really exist. So I'm just winging it here. You know, obviously some portions of this are based on an actual human skull, but most of it's just made up as you go along. And the rest is just a basic sculpt. Now let's get rid of this. Now if you go here, you can see here are the pile of sculpts. I save everything, right? Every time I make a major change, I will save another version of the file. And then, in fact, I have two external hard drives that I will save copies to, because you never know. Stuff happens, get lost, gets corrupted. Maybe you save when you shouldn't. It's always good to have extra backups. Now, this skull is pretty much exactly the same. The only thing is, I wanted him to look a little more beat up. So I imagined him to be sort of the leader of the demons, and the Enchantress had to really give him what for. So she kicked his butt a little extra hard, and I wanted to show that in the horns. So I sculpted sort of in a marrow, a middle center, and then, like she did something, cracked his horns. So I wanted a little cracks, just nice little fun detail. Gives a little extra interest, you know. And that's really all there was. This is pretty basic stuff. The most tedious part about this was when I was done, and you'll see here what I did. Oops, got the two upper teeth. So if I go here, object, set origin to 3D cursor, hit 3 for a side view. Now if I rotate it, you'll see that I sculpted it separately because I wasn't really sure how I was going to handle this. Maybe I wanted to open that jaw, maybe I didn't. I wanted to have some options. In the end, I chose not to open it, but I could still always use this somewhere else and open the jaw. Who knows? It's good to leave yourself options. And really the most tedious part about this was the teeth. Everything else was really simple. When I was done with this, I had to join all these teeth to the skull. That kind of sucked, but it's just part of the job. So that is the skull. Base is in here. Here is the earliest version of the base. Bink. Now you see here I have an extra, I have a staff here. I saved this at 90 degrees, so in case I wanted to make some changes to it. It's always easier to make it when everything's, standing up perfectly straight. If it was on an angle, moving stuff around can sometimes be tricky. So I like to have an extra version of it somewhere that I can make changes to, and then I can always go back, rotate it, and put it in the same angle that it is in the finished piece. So let's see. Let's just hide that and get it out of the way. So here are all the skulls on the base. Let's hide those skulls, and you can see what I did. Now, I usually save it after I make any major change, and I'm surprised I didn't save these. I don't have these anywhere unjoined and untextured, which is unusual for me, but I usually forget something. I like to have everything saved in an original form so that if I need to go back for some reason and make changes, I don't have to recreate something. Like let's say this one for some reason got messed up and I needed to redo it. I don't want to have to worry about matching these other ones. Although even though here they're all separate, so I could just copy and paste. But that's not my point. I like to have the original untextured, unjoined parts so that I can go back and make any changes if I needed. What if I decided I hated the way all of these looked and I wanted to do something slightly different? Well, I would have to recreate this. So that's bad on my part. I should have saved these, but well, I didn't. So let's see. So what I wanted to talk about is how I did these tiles. Now, as you can see, all the bricks, I guess, are in place, but they're untextured and they're unjoined. And when I first looked at this, I was like, how the hell am I going to do this? Right? So basically what I did was mesh. Now let's add a cylinder. Scale it down. Hit 1. Now let's scale it down on the Z. So I had a piece like this in the center, right? You can see it here. This added is sort of like the mortar you see between all the bricks. If I hide it, you can see there was 2 levels, right? There's another one a little higher up for the second step. But the big challenge was they all had to have a slight curve in them, and they all had to fit in this circular pattern. So how was I going to do that? Right? That was the tricky bit. So this is what I came up with. So let's copy that, right? I hit Shift D to duplicate it. Now let's hit Tab to go into edit mode. Now I'm just going to select the top face, hit X, and then I'm going to delete the face. And I'm going to select the bottom face and hit X and delete that face. Now I'll hit A to select the entire thing, and then E to extrude, and I'm going to scale it in. Now, when you do that, though, if I hit the X-ray mode, you can see that it also scales in the Z. So I'm going to hit SZ to make sure it lines up, and I might even do this. I'll select all the top vertices, I'll hit S for scale, Z, and then 0, and that brings them to absolutely level, right? All of those vertices are now on the same plane. S, Z, 0. Absolutely level, right? So now anything I scale the whole thing up, they'll all scale together. So if we look, it's the exact same size as the base, right? Which is not what we want. We want them to go just a little bit over. So let's scale it up a bit. Now, here's the tricky part. I could try and do some kind of wacky thing where I do loop cuts in between them and then extrude them down to get those spaces, but I don't know, that didn't seem like the good way to go. So what I wound up doing was this. So let's make this a brick, right? So I'm going to select that edge, X. I'm going to delete the vertices. I'm going to select that brick, X, and I'm going to delete the vertices. Then I'm going to hit any vertex in the rest of it and hit L, and it will select all of them. X, delete. So I will go here, select those vertices, and hit F to face. Here, select all those vertices, F to face. Now what I have is one brick that's appropriately curved, right? When I hit subsurf, right? So let's go here. I said let's go here, subsurf. I usually go up to 3. I only go up to 4 or 5 or higher if I need to. Okay, let's hit that. Now, we got a pill. We don't have a square. So what you have to do all right, there's our nice square brick. Now, since the origin is right here in the middle of the circle, all I have to do is hit Shift D, right, and then rotate. And then I can select both of these and hit Shift D and rotate again. Now, we'll see how this works out. Maybe I'll get lucky and it'll do it right the first time. But you'll notice there were no spaces. So I may not fit perfectly. And I had to fool around with the sizes till I found a gap that I kind of liked. You want all the gaps to be roughly the same. Maybe this one will work out perfectly. Nope. So I got, a situation here where they're not quite right. I can go back in here and mess around with it like that. Or I can start again and resize the brick and try it all again. And since this is not that much of work, either way is fine. It's just whatever you feel like putting up with. Oops. Okay, that's not perfect, but it's not bad. Right, and as you can see on this one, if this was the bottom, I could just go, oh, we're still got that. So I could go like that. And then I can just keep going. I could either now choose to try and do a couple things. It's probably, you want to keep this origin in the center, because if I were to say duplicate this and then move it in and then shrink it, now my origins are all off. And I could approximate it, but it's going to be difficult to get everything back in the center. So I think it would be easiest to just copy that disk again, bring it up, hit 7 to look at it from above, scale it in to what you want, and then do the whole thing all over again, right? Get rid of that, X, face, get rid of that, X, face, hit A to select all, E, whoops, what happened there? Scale, Z, 0. Looks a little wonky, not quite sure what happened. Sometimes that happens. It's sort of annoying, but well, that's life. And then you sink that down. And you start over, right? So I would want to, so I want to make sure that the next brick is like here, right? So I want to make sure that it's the same size, or that it's the right size, L, X, vertices. You got to make sure you close these things. And it is easier to subsurf and do everything you need to do to the first brick before you copy and set it up. Otherwise, you got to do that same thing, another 15 times, and it gets a little boring and tedious. So if I was to just do all of this now, right, I don't have to worry about it later. It's done, and it's done for all the copied bricks. Right? Oops. And you just go on and on. Now, the only other difference was this one, I wanted to cut a pentagram out of the center. And as all I really did was I created the pentagram. I think these are, yeah, these are just box modeled. So there's nothing really special there. I just drew a pentagram. Oh, you can see here I started to texture this one. And the only thing I did was, so at first I placed all of the bricks in, and then I went in and I cut them with the Boolean modifier after everything was in place, so I knew where to cut. And I also wanted to take care, at this point I had only done like a couple of resin prints, so I wasn't sure what kind of detail I would get, so I didn't want to go too tiny. Like, this is a pretty small brick, that's, the X is not even 2 millimeters, but it came out fine. And that's basically all there was to the base. The tricky bit was then I had to Boolean join all of these bricks together. In fact, I have another video that I will probably put out soon that I made while I was doing this on Boolean joining all of this mess. So I won't ruin that. I'll put that out. Maybe I'll put that one out next, because that would make sense. Um, but that's basically all there was to the bricks.